Hello, everybody. I was listening to a podcast with a few, I think there was like a guy who was hosting it, a researcher who had recently published a paper called something like "What Do Algorithms Want?" And Bernardo Castro, who is one of the more brilliant minds I've come across lately. Not claiming I agree with him, but Bernardo is so intelligent that agreement isn't the issue. That just stops even being a question. We live in a time where humans are battling each other with ideological weapons. And some think they have a superior weapon to the other people's, right? There's some argument for Israel obliterating Gaza, and there's some argument for Iran, unleashing apocalypse on Israel, and there's some argument, there's a million arguments, right? And everyone thinks they've got the right ideology. Let me just be really clear. If you're navigating in mind space based on ideologies, you are fucked. You don't have a fucking chance. Your capacity for intelligence will go down near zero. And it will only rise as you rage from your ideological throne. And the direction it will rise in is a direction where it will weaponize itself against your own intelligence. Woe be unto those who weaponize their intelligence via ideology, especially these days, because that's the primary viral petri dish that's being intentionally manipulated. So be careful about that. I've had friends look down their nose at me because I listen to anyone. Brett Weinstein, Eric Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, fucking J.K. Rowling. You think I'm not going to listen to brilliant authors, musicians, dancers, actors, speakers, professors, because I have an ideological problem with them? There's no chance of that happening. Impossible. I don't learn based on ideological favoritism or exclusionism. If I were to do so, it wouldn't matter which ideology I picked. I would be a bird with one feather. So I'm also at the same time not saying that I have zero participation in ideology. Of course I have various spoons in various pots in the kitchen of ideologies. But I rarely go around, as an ideological warrior, brandishing my sword in public. Never. And when I do, it's usually, about something that's pretty obviously lethal for humans to keep doing. Or me, right? A lot of the time, the more upset I am about something, the more ironic the fact that I'm upset becomes, because there's some projection involved, right? There's I've got inner insecurities or failings, and I see them somehow reflected in the world, and not being quite bold enough to, or it's not just courage. I'm courageous. I'll go look. I kind of, just like many humans, I need a skillful wing person or two to hold my hand while I go to Mount Doom, to where my psyche keeps its poison. Yeah. So I therefore have failed to go, and don't realize that I'm really upset because I see a reflection of my own failings in the anti-culture I'm surrounded by, and so I react. Right? Human. I'm an actual human being. I am fraught with human failings, and I'm trying to see better and learn. I'm pretty sure that's a lot of why we come to incarnation. That's not an excuse. Just trying to be honest. So, be careful about picking up ideological weapons and sides and so forth. There's a lot of mimetic pathology intentionally being injected into the human cognition, and particularly the West at the moment. In the countries injecting it, their ideology is nationalistic, right? Or religious, or both, religiously nationalistic. So that's lethal too. Like birds with their wings snipped off and missing all the feet on one of their legs. We humans suffer catastrophically when our perspectival faculties are amputated or replaced with prosthetic ideals that are fundamentally untrustworthy. Their origins are untrustworthy. Right? But that's not actually what I'm here to talk about today. That is that little that little section of my talk relates to having seen a lot of vitriol and hatred and trolling on the internet. I don't know if you can hear the bird sound, but there's heron chicks. And they're trying to get, they seem to be quite well fed, but they're trying to recruit feeding from the parents. So, what I'm thinking about today what I was listening to was some discussions of findings related to the intentional introduction of teratogens to embryonic cohorts. And usually I didn't realize that I thought teratogenesis was referred to cancer causing, but apparently not. It's more like perturbing, and possibly dangerously perturbing living systems or an organism or so forth, at least according to what I understood from the podcast I was listening to, in which it wasn't defined. But they said they introduced teratogens to disturb the process of embryogenesis, and that effectively, now what I really am interested to find out, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer because they would have said something, I think, but what they were saying, which was relatively surprising, was that larger groups of embryos, I don't know what kind they were using, adjusted better. Hello, nice to see you today. Thank you. What they discovered to their surprise was that larger groups of embryos solved teratogenic problems faster and more effectively. And also, which I'm not sure how they tested this, because this is a fairly strange finding, in a sense. Groups that contained embryos which had experience of previous solving of certain teratogenic problems were the best at solving the problems. So this indicates that the embryos are communicating. Now, what I don't know is what they mean by a cohort. It sounds like they probably mean embryos in a contiguous medium of some kind, right? So like, I don't know, 15 embryos in some gel-like matrix that can support their development and not fuck them up, and into which teratogens can be introduced. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all. In fact, the expectations of modern science surprise me much more, because it looks pretty ass backwards to me in a lot of ways. I'm going to talk about one of those ways today. Also, one can imagine upon hearing this and the other findings from this group, which are even trippier. Let's see if I can get this right. So imagine you have an array of numbers that meets at the end. A string, we'll call it a string of numbers, right? So there's cells in a circle. There could be 100 of them. And the ends of the string meet. So if we number the cells, they number from 1 to 100, and cell 1 and cell 100 meet. And the algorithm, all it does is, it's a sorting algorithm. So they put 100 numbers in there, probably integers, and they put them in at random. And they want to end up with a sorted array. This is like one of the first programming problems you would be given, because it helps you understand sorting And there's a bunch of different ways to accomplish that process. What these people were doing is very simple. It has no unknown parts, right? They have an incredibly simple algorithm. They actually code each number with this simple algorithm that the language he used, which I think was pretty strange to hear from a scientist about numbers, is if a number finds that it's happier where it is, it will stay there, right? If it's 4, it wants to have 3 on one side, 5 on the other, right? That's what the that's what the scientist said. But what we should actually think about is that the algorithm codes for evaluation and cell swapping. So if it finds, 97 on one side and 24 on the other, and it's a 4, it won't presume which direction. I don't think. They didn't say this, but I don't think it presumes direction. It may presume the gradient of high to one side, low to the left. It may notice that. And thus, test a leftward move if it wants to go lower. So the numbers rearrange themselves according to this algorithm. And what they found some unusual things, which is that numbers with certain qualities, like apparently prior to the final sort position, hang out in little clades where the numbers share certain unique qualities. For example, perhaps being even numbers, or multiples of 2 or something, right? Like, they find that there's clumpiness in the interim between, while the numbers are traveling, they clump up in ways that the algorithm has nothing to do with. And so, now I haven't listened to the rest of this. I've only really listened to maybe the first 10 minutes of this discussion. Now, obviously, Rupert Sheldrake, with his, and boy, does that guy get shade from scientists. Wow, they hate him. He is roundly despised because it's anathema to believe that there are anything but physical, atomic, or direct electromagnetic connections between organisms. And by direct electromagnetic, I don't mean distributed hypersystem of intelligence. I mean, the organisms can be, you can detect an electromagnetic signal from one that travels to the other, and so forth. And by the way, with the embryos, they did detect signaling. They weren't able to conclusively determine all of the pathways, but wow. Sorry, I've just got up the hill a bit and have noticed the poison they put in the water. Oh wow, is that a bee swarm? What is that? No. I don't know what it is.
Thank goodness. Look at the jewels. I'm totally rich.
there's a word for an airborne gathering of mating insects, and I can't recall it. I learned it after I found a rare wood-boring wasp from New Zealand here. It's probably a little bit like an egregore. The word might be a little bit like that. So Sheldrake is a proponent of the idea of what he calls morphogenic fields. And morphogen means shape make, right? Morph is form or shape. Genic means to generate. Cygenic means mind generating. The sun turns out to be cygenic if you couple it with a world with liquid water and so forth, right? You're going to get minds around there eventually, and probably right quick. The Earth is cygenic, right? Couple a planet like this with the sun and the moon, and perhaps the other planets as well, probably, and you're going to get minds. So, if you think that way, then you realize that the idea that humans have, that there was some grand mechanical accident, right? It's a give me one miracle gambit. Give me the Big Bang, and I'll mechanically explain everything else. Penrose hates this argument, and he's right to do so. And whatever the bang was, it's certainly an event, if it's even an event. It's a situation we are woefully ill-equipped to categorize. We certainly don't even have categories for stuff that generates categories, right? And you can't say meta-category because that's really just a category. So you have to have categories for things that generate the possibility of minds, beings, souls, relationships, all of the peculiarly misunderstood features of physics and so forth, misunderstood by humans. So Sheldrake has this theory that, what the hell was that? I saw a creature. I don't know what it was. Must have been a mouse or something, I guess. The thing that I'm actually hoping, what would be awesome is if somebody introduced blue-bellied lizards here. That would be rad. We need some reptiles. I don't know why there's no reptiles here. Other than turtles. So Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields theory is I'm going to be very trivial in the way that I talk about it. But it's essentially the idea that, or casual would be a better word. It's the idea that it gets progressively easier locally, probably localized, presuming the effect is localized. There could be ways to distribute it. It might be distributed and local. To produce forms once you've done it once, right? After you get the first salt crystal, it's much easier. It requires less time, work, failure, so forth, to produce another one. And so there's this sort of contagiousness of form. Now, I'm not sure if Sheldrake's a genius about how he frames his theory, but the idea makes a lot of sense if you observe processes in nature. There tends to be a luxurious reiteration. You get in a petri dish that's being flash frozen, or a large dish of a thin layer of water. Once you get the first ice crystal, the whole thing crystallizes almost instantaneously after that. You can slow it down, to, I don't know what, 1,000,000 frames per second or something, and then what you'll probably see is multiple origin points. There will be a first one, most likely. Two won't exactly temporally coincide. There'll probably a first one. And you see similar processes if you examine embryogenesis and stuff like this. If you could watch, for example, with an electron microscope, which would probably fail because that thing kills what it looks at, but I'm pretty sure. But presume you could take electron micrographs piece by piece, as a photographer named Nilsson did in the 80s, of the steps along the embryogenic process. You would see similar kinds of transformation within the egg cell. Right. I saw a video somehow of two researchers observing the embryogenesis in what looked like some kind of bird egg, where the embryogenesis was happening in a shell-less state, right? And I found it very troubling. Human science doesn't seem to have a lot of respect for living beings, and is happy to torture and obliterate them, and has a bizarre metric of value where the more of some creature there appears to be on the planet, or the faster they reproduce, the more likely we are to use them as test subjects for experimentation. And I'm not going to go on at length about that problem, but the ideological position that human life is more valuable than other life in some way is wrong. Fundamentally wrong. And if you had a way of knowing that you were going to authorize as married to truthfulness or verity, veracity, then that way of knowing has rather than having less responsibility to be moral and ethical, it has much more responsibility to be moral and ethical. And so we have this problem in science where it is presumed that the pursuit of knowledge must be accomplished at nearly any cost, and possibly the cost of everything. It's a sort of breakneck race for knowledge, without us having developed societies intelligent enough to survive the knowledge we derive from science. So that's a huge problem, and could snuff our species, even within a few generations. It's strange that the ways of knowing we most rely upon to enhance our understanding and intelligence do not respect organisms at all. They will happily torture billions of them all day, every day, for the sake of what we think of as perhaps medical science. So our science has a problem, and it's a moral and ethical problem. And I've covered this in other recordings, so it's not my goal here to talk about that issue today. What Sheldrake thinks is going on is much more likely to be true. Modern science tends to presume that all media and contexts are dead inside, right? It's a mechanist, reductionist ideology underneath science, which has no right to be there. That thing does not belong there. There is no evidence for that thing, in the same way scientists love to dance around claiming there's no evidence. There's no evidence for a mechanical universe that's dead inside. In fact, all of the evidence is on the other side of it. All of it. So most likely the context is transcendent or something even more advanced than that, right? It's being, life, and soul producing, productive of beings, or at least productive of vehicles for beings. So that means that not only is the media of time, space, and particularly localized around a planet with liquid water like ours, not only is that media transcendental to organisms and productive of them naturally, it's not dead inside, right? It's more than merely alive. See, this is again the problem. We are missing categories that would allow us to understand, that would give us the possibility of understanding the situation local to the Earth. If you try to raise an embryo in a context that isn't alive, you don't get an embryo, right? There's no situation in which a dead context produces an embryo. There are zero of such situations. And humans can mess around with the situation, in which case life is touching the thing. And if life is touching the thing, life can communicate life into the thing if it's the kind of container that can contain beings. So Sheldrake's position is that there are fields, there are sort of, and they may have physical properties that we don't yet understand or haven't figured out how to detect. Though EM is certainly involved. I mean, light is everywhere, mostly. Well, it's everywhere on the surface of the Earth. And even the vacuum of space is not really empty. It's full of light. It's full of electromagnetic stuff. And probably other stuff, like dark matter. We have no idea what that is. It's 85% of what's going on out there, apparently. So, the incredible hubris of our species is strange. Intelligent people pursuing scientific disciplines should certainly grow some humility. We've had science is how old? Science as we practice it today? 150 years? 200 years? If it goes back to the 1600s with physics or something, fine. Okay, so 400 years, big deal. It's not even a single eye blink of it's not one gunshot of geologic time or even organismal time. Nothing. It was brand new. We're in preschool around here. We've become confused as a species because we can build what look like sophisticated machines that can maximize our capacity to harness, certain features of the seemingly problematical context of gravity in a world that has to be at a certain temperature for us to survive. So Sheldrake, I mention him because I'm going to go in a direction he proposed. He gets lambasted. He's done studies on telepathy, that showed high p-value results in favor, particularly in situations where there's intimacy, situations among animals, and those of us who are human have experienced telepathy, most of us, at least once or twice in our lives. We may have experienced it many times per day and just not be aware of it because our conscious mind is focused elsewhere. It's focused on, thoughts and ideas and such. I really liked what Jordan Peterson suggested in his discussion with John Vervaeke the other day, that that thinking is reminiscent of the... Oh no, I lost the word here. Yes, this one word, it's a little problem in my vocabulary. It sort of means not... the monks who live in the regular world, they are this. Well, I'm sure my hippocampus will get a little jolt within the next few minutes and remind me of the word. But basically what he was saying is that they were the not necessarily sacred version of prayer. Because we get a sense that something's missing, right? Or something needs attention, and then, who is it that attends it? Who gets a sense that that something's missing or wrong? Who is it that gets the sense that something more is desired or needed? And who answers and who receives the answer in all of these questions? Very interesting. But I liked his idea that thinking is the non-sacred version of something not dissimilar to prayer. I think it's a beautiful thought, whether or not it's a fact. Sometimes when there's a hole in my vocabulary, it's probably there just so that my listeners can work theirs and fill it in for me. So Sheldrake has shown something very close to group sensing, which is why in these embryo experiments there's something very trippy going on, for sure, not maybe. Although Kastrup's arguing that it's an epistemological illusion, or what? No, it's an illusion of how we look at it, epistemic illusion. The same way that gliders in the game of life by Conway are epistemic illusions, they're not really there. It's just cells following the algorithm. It's the inclusion of our interests, purposes, and perspectives that produces the phenomena in the game of life that we call gliders. He's not wrong, but it's trippier, I think, than that. And Kastrup likes to go from the complex to the simple rather than the large to the small, he says, in his simplifications. And he's a very brilliant mind. But he's arguing for a simplicity that I suspect is too facile. I'm not sure. He might have it right. But he's saying that the effects that are seen, for example, in the algorithmic clustering that looks preferential, it looks like, the blue-eyed numbers are getting together in little groups while they sort themselves into the proper order. There's a in-between phase where they group up unexpectedly in ways that the algorithm can't account for. And part of what I think is going on there, and also with the embryos, but the question I have about the embryos is, are they in a contiguous medium? Do they do the same thing if you raise... What happens if you raise 1,000 embryos for example, and subject them to the teratogen test, or, break them into hundreds, but keep them in separate containments, but keep them in the same room and synchronized to the same origin moment and things like this. Can they communicate across the barrier? Like, if they're not in one contiguous medium, can they still communicate? Because they found them communicating with molecular signals and stuff, ATP and calcium, I think he mentioned. And one of the things he claimed was that this would help us a lot to do higher quality medical testing of pharmaceuticals, because if to whatever degree test subjects were clustered, they would be helping each other solve problems that wouldn't be able to be solved that way in any individual. And so the individual could easily die of an effect that is not seen or is minimal in the cohort. And we've had this happen before. Okay, what happened was, and this is Brett Weinstein's, this is one of his, profound chips on his shoulder, Eric's brother, evolutionary biologist. Back in the day, everyone knew that the telomeres of wild-type mice were long, right? This means lots of things. The simplest thing it means is, every time a cell divides, a piece of the telomere is used up. And this is why we age, right? Is because the telomere is a brace against mutation. I may have this wrong. I'm not an expert, and it's been a long time since I've looked at texts and such about this, but I think it's a hedge against mutation. It may do some checksumming, or the cell may use the telomere to do something like a checksum to ensure that replication goes better than it would without one. In any case, as a cell ages, probably it acquires a library of mutations, and the telomere keeps cells, it basically keeps account of cell divisions. And so it limits the number of cell divisions, thus reducing the number of mutations, if I understand this properly and my memory serves me well. It's a little bit like a zipper. And by all means, take some time and learn some basic stuff about telomeres. So it was thought that wild type, meaning wild, in the wild mice, had long telomeres because, the lab mice had long telomeres. And Brett decided to figure out why that was so. And probably had a suspicion that long telomeres could be problematical in drug testing, right? We test pharmaceuticals on these mice. So Brett went out and got some wild mice. And he bought some lab mice, which are supposed to be wild type. And what he discovered was that, and this is the fucking problem. This is exactly what I'm here to talk about today. What he discovered is that wild type mice have regular old telomeres. They're not long. The mice that were being touted as wild type and sold to labs all over the world were mostly from a single lab. And that lab was breeding if you over on the other side, they're much easier to see because there's a hole.
I went there earlier, but I think they were in in their nest.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
They're kind of active right now.
Yeah.
So
I
saw the
think-
one I can hear the babies crying.
Oh, yeah, me
That
too.
sound, I'm like, I know they're up there.
Yeah, they're recruiting the parents to feed them. They're getting really well fed.
Yeah.
So what he discovered is that the wild mice had regular telomeres. And the lab mice had very long telomeres because the breeding protocols of the lab suppliers were using the strongest, healthiest young mice, never used older mice. And so they had naturally bred long telomere test mice. Now what that turns out to mean is that when you do pharmaceutical experiments and you test them on mice and you try to, test all kinds of different features of drug efficacy and danger, mice with long telomeres are going to heal much better than regular mice would. And by the way, there's I think Eric's kind of ashamed of this one, but there's a great discussion between Eric and Brett about this that Eric recorded probably 6-7 years ago now. That tells this whole story, and it's really worth listening to if you have an interest in biology. And
Sweet potato fries to go.
and sweet potato fries to go, I guess. If you have an interest in biology, and particularly cell division, right? Anything involving cell division.
Yeah, because I was wondering for a long time, economics, and we lived abroad for various.
It turns out that Brett discovered this, and his discoveries, as I understand it, his discoveries were effectively stolen by somebody who I think went on to get a Nobel Prize from this work. And also,
In the lake gave to the turtle, who wanted retribution.
they did eventually go back and fix the mouse problem, I think, at the primary mouse producing lab. But in the meantime, what happened is, and this is really tragic, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people died from drug effects that didn't show up in the mouse model because the mice had unusually well-developed telomeres and could heal better, right? Survive effects that ordinary animals would not survive. And so I think it was, erythromycin, if I'm not mistaken, killed up a bunch of people by fucking up their hearts. And this is something that happens in humans a lot. You saw this going on with the COVID vaccine. Fucked up people's hearts or just killed them outright. And, a bunch of furious lying has been going on about the vaccine. For sure, not maybe. That's a slightly different topic, but on the same page. So if your mice are super harm resistant and you're testing pharmaceutical drugs on them to determine what's safe in humans, there's supposed to be extended trials beyond the mouse model that happen in drugs that are going to be widely distributed or whatever. Obviously, that must have fallen down too. And it wasn't just erythromycin. There were many pharmaceutical drugs that killed people or produced really severe side effects in part because the testing model was broken, right? We had genetically engineered super mice and we were testing pharmaceuticals on super mice, not ordinary mice, not regular animals, right? We had accidentally produced gain-of-function telomeres. And you might say, like, well, why don't we just give humans longer telomeres? Well, you know, you could slow down the aging process quite a bit, but what you'd get is a profusion of cancer. Animals have a lifespan in a purposeful way. It's not an accident. Also, the idea that we are our body is probably, I would say, nearly certainly wrong. It is the ideology of science to presume this. That's a dumb presumption. There's, again, no evidence for this. People will say, well, what about unconsciousness and stuff? Yeah, go ahead. Say whatever you like. Unconsciousness doesn't tell you how to determine it, how to interpret it. Right? You can say, well, if you damage certain parts of the brain, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's true in the body. At the scale of the body, that's true. You have no idea what's going on in consciousness. And you have all kinds of complex reports of what are called emergence phenomenon things, where people who are supposedly, you know, you have a whole fabulously detailed reports from like the atheist neurosurgeon who died, right? And his brain should never have recovered. It was profusely septic, and he should have just stayed dead. And so here we're starting to get toward the problem that I want to actually talk about today. We depend on science as a species both to jumpstart our technologies, which again, you know, we haven't formed any societies intelligent enough to survive those technologies, so it's very obvious that we are racing toward a wall of plasma or something, right? Like, it's not even a brick wall, it's something way worse than that. As a species, we are accelerating downhill toward 1,900 different kinds of disasters that will eventually, you know, one of the 19 will snuff us, or most of life on Earth, or both. Now, it's not, as Dr. K argues, it's not certain that they'll snuff us. And Dr. K is there's no evidence kind of scientist, but so he likes to say, there's no evidence that humans can wipe out the humans. Nuclear war won't do that. We've been through shit before. This is the we've been through shit before argument, and it's also Earth is really resilient. Well, I'm pretty sure that a single human being can presently, armed with a little bit of uncommon intelligence, pose a threat to the entirety of cellular life on Earth. With a simple technological gambit that a single person could pull off with about 15 grand. So, you know, and whether or not that's true, it soon will be, right? If your goal is to take down the biosphere and you're armed with, you know, a little bit of AI and some CRISPR tech, you can probably pull that shit off. You can probably point a gun at the planet and say, give me everything or we all die. Or, you know, whatever you want to say. And unfortunately, sooner or later, that's going to happen. Presuming something else doesn't intervene. But that's not, again, my point. So what I want to talk about is a problem with knowledge. And the problem is that the knowledge that we think of as objective, the knowledge that we get from science, is quite authoritative. I mean, compared to the regular stuff we play with, it's vastly more trustworthy. Because it's not just based on syllogisms, though axioms are involved. Whereas most of our knowledge is propositional, right? Someone proposes that.
It's not a political feature. It's not politics.
Someone proposes that blah blah blah, and then we, go around arguing about it and so forth. That's propositional. A lot of the knowledge that we get from science, and there's all the different branches of the tree, and science really. It's unreasonable from one perspective to think of it as a single endeavor, but we might want to think of it as a way of knowing. A vast forest of methods and protocols that help to limit our capacity to make catastrophic mistakes of identity, function, value, so forth. It's analytical, it's abstract, in the sense that it forges systematic methods, protocols, and perspectives. I can't quote the principles of the scientific method, but there's a couple that are sort of well known. Something that isn't falsifiable cannot be pursued scientifically. So if it's unavailable to proof or disproof, it's speculation or philosophy in terms of ways of knowing, or opinion. And generally, science as practiced modernly is a bit combative. You don't just go out looking for proof for your pet theory the way that people with opinions do, or speculations or ideas. Secular is the word. Jordan Peterson opined that perhaps thought was kind of the secular version of prayer, and I think that's a really beautiful, interesting idea, whether or not you are religious. Also, you can have the experience of prayer even if you are not religious, just to be clear. One might ask, well, why would you do that? If you're driving down the street with your children in the back of the car and you see in the slow time that often happens during accidents that your car is about to be hit by a semi-truck and there are 0 things you can do about it. Time has slowed down. In that time, you might very well appeal to anything that might be listening. And that would be a kind of prayer. All right, so secular prayer. Thought as secular prayer. Love that idea. Of course, some kinds of thought qualify better than others. I think Peterson means speculative thought, which involves asking questions. Just saw a guy wearing a t-shirt that said, "We are supposed to be different." Each word was on one line, top to bottom, and the last word was spelled and printed backwards, perhaps as if it's not actually mirrored. I don't think it's actually mirrored. All right, so back to our topic. The authoritative nature of scientific endeavor, research, publishing, thought, technology transfer, drug development, and so forth. All of these things. Science is a vast enterprise among the humans. There are branches on the tree of science that are non-professional, right? There are people who do various kinds of science that don't work for universities or labs, that are sort of self-made, if you will. All kinds of different human expressions of the possibilities that this word points toward. And the human ways of knowing they are trees in the same forest, right? They inform each other. Science informs art. Math informs art, science, history, even religion. So you have many ways of knowing, perhaps 9 or 10 primary ones, perhaps less, 5 or 6. Depends on how you want to draw the circles. And they interact and often cooperate, developmentally. One would ask, well, how does art inform science? Well, take away all the music for the past 400 years. Let there be no music. Let there be no sculpture, no dance, no plays, no acting. Would you have the same scientific findings? Would you have the same scientists? I don't think so.
Well, that's what she thought. Yeah, and sorry.
Not at all. There's enough room for all of us.
Good.
Politics affects science. Not supposed to. Religion affects science. There are scientists who are not reductive materialists. Rupert Sheldrake is one of them. So too in his way. Although Berlinski is a mathematician, Berlinski is religious. Stephen Meyer, brilliant computational scientist and biologist, is not an eliminative materialist, like Dan Dennett, who is an eliminative materialist, and I'm pretty sure, at least Dr. K tells me this, has never conducted a single experiment in his life. So how are you a scientist if you don't do research? Dennett, and I don't know his work well, and he seems an interesting mind to me. When I have looked at some of his writing and stuff, I can learn from that guy for sure, no doubt. What have we here? This is the kind of thing I dreamed of when I was a kid. It's a brand new Ferrari. Yeah, there's a piece of technology I wouldn't mind playing with. Yeah, that was my wet dream as a child. Have a Ferrari in the future. I mean, these days what I'd like to have is an old Volvo, but I can't really have one here unless I have a garage to put it in, which is just too damn expensive. Because people will fuck it up and steal it and stuff. Yeah, I'd like to have one of those old Volvos like the Saint drove. I think it's a P 185 or something, maybe can't remember. And I was actually looking at them yesterday, and I could probably buy one. I could get one. But I have no place to put it, and I definitely can't afford. Like, it's not worth. I'd have to pay rent just to keep it safe. But otherwise, I would definitely have one. That would be a blast. I love old cars. Old cars are much richer and have so much more character than what people make today. Though that Ferrari two-seater was pretty sporty. All right, back to the topic, which I really haven't even gotten to yet. So, many people have remarked of late about problems in the academy and problems in science, particularly around what Eric Weinstein calls gatekeeping, which means a preferential selectiveness over who gets to do science and what kind of science gets done in the academy, and probably even in industry, but primarily in the academy, where we would presume scientific education begins. And he's right. And of course, then there's a third problem, which is gatekeeping over the journals. So this means preferential treatment, not just of authors, but of ideologies, right? Which is definitely not supposed to be a part of what science is. Science is not an ideological affair, structure. It is an affair of veracity, of integrity, of honesty, hard work, right? You form a hypothesis, you try to defeat it every way you can. You get experts in the field to try to tear your hypothesis down and show you why it can't be true. And only after all of that do you publish. And Eric is claiming this whole affair has become profoundly corrupt. And he's right. Scientific careers depend on publishing. So if anything captures or interferes with publishing, you're pretty much screwed as a scientist. At least as a professional scientist. And he's arguing that the journals are not just currying favor, they're publishing bullshit, which both things are true. And that I think he's also arguing that the peer review process is corrupt, which is also almost certainly the case. At least there must be examples of this that are common. It's not saying it never works. I don't think he's saying it never works. He's saying there's poison in the water and nobody's fixed it. Not only are we not fixing it, we keep dumping more poison in. And I think he's right. But there is a weirder problem. While I was listening, and again, this is the kind of thing, what I'm going to be talking about is partly theoria, in the sense of a way of seeing, a way of looking at something. I'm not arguing yet that what I'm saying is a fact. Often in science, one produces a privileged containment context in which to do experiments, right? Because we want to quote control for unexpected variability. We want to make sure that we don't have a contaminated situation. we want to be able to trust our own variables. The tunnel. So, you know, we produce these contexts that are extremely unnatural, and then we test stuff in them. Nothing ever grew up in a box. If you raised a child in a box that was, you know, evicted from all of nature, well, first of all, you wouldn't be able to keep the child alive. You'd have to import microbes and shit into the situation, and you'd have to select them and so forth. But if you raise a child in a box with no living beings, which you would not get a human, right? And so there's a fundamental problem with the way we test. We presume that phenomena that exist in nature can be found in the laboratory. Not true. That is not true. There is a selection of phenomena that exist in nature that can be found in the laboratory, a subset of phenomena. But because the laboratory is a construct in a way that nature isn't, and because it is an intentionally limited construct, we must realize that there are phenomena in nature that will be recalcitrant to reproduction in laboratories. And so we have to find a different way of testing for them, looking for them. And so that's one problem. A lot of the lab tests for telepathy and such appear to have been intentionally tampered with the purpose of failing to produce results. Right? Not all of them, but some of them for sure. And we do see this kind of thing going on in certain branches of science. We can find studies that appear to disprove or debunk or evict phenomena or a phenomenon. I always get confused about that. There are studies that are done occasionally to disprove things, right? There's no such thing as telepathy, out-of-body experiences. All UFOs are just misidentified stuff we know about already, blah, 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 list goes on. Vaccine, the COVID vaccine is safe and effective. Bullshit. Like straight up lying. And politically motivated lying. Right? It's not medically motivated lying, it's politically motivated lying. So, as far as the vaccines go, modestly effective, not ineffective, modestly effective and, modestly safe. It didn't kill 1 million people. It only probably killed, I don't know, so far maybe, wild guess would be 300, 400,000 worldwide. I don't know. So we get fake science, right? We get science done to show that something can't be done that is actually real. And then we also get ideological bias. Nobody's paying attention to Sheldrake's papers because it goes against the prevailing ideological underpinnings of eliminative materialism. Everything's physical, life is an accident, the universe is dead inside. Zero evidence for those ideological positions. They don't belong in science. Any science that goes around telling you things are impossible, you can already see the problem, right? Because it presumes complete knowledge. That's unscientific. And it is ontologically tyrannical. It declares what can and can't be true or possible. And let's be clear, if you have, 0.0003% knowledge of reality, and that would be a huge boost to what humans actually have access to presently. Going around making declarative statements about what can't be is the pinnacle of hubris, right? They're just idiotic. So when you hear people saying, this is it's impossible to travel to Alpha Centauri spontaneously, there's no evidence for that claim. There's no evidence either way. We don't have strong evidence that it's possible, but we could go looking for evidence of that possibility if we intended to do so open-mindedly and with integrity. We could go looking. My goodness, I have worn too much clothing today. That is for sure. Used to the cold breeziness. So, we have a problem in science in that the laboratory is unnatural. If you go testing for telepathy, what you want to test, the people you want to test are like mothers and their children. If you're trying to find the result, what you want to do is test people who are extremely intimate, because it's very obvious that these people synchronize, and that changes what's going on.
Well, yeah, because normally, people are so leery about it.
So you can see there's like there's a sort of prejudice to the laboratory, and the prejudice is eliminate as many variables as possible. Well, if you're trying to determine whether a phenomenon exists or not, you need to have something like the actual world, not a laboratory, to look for it in. You probably want to look for it in the natural world first, and then play around with producing a laboratory context in which you could reliably determine its prevalence or non-prevalence, right? So we have that problem. We have the problem of the abstract container. Nobody kisses a wall, right? And most of life is intimate and symbiotic. So the lab is kind of the wrong place to see a bunch of the features of organisms. And we see this problem exactly in what Brett discovered about the mice, right? Labs were producing the mice that labs were testing with. When he went out into nature and got actual mice, what did he find? Shorter telomeres, right? Which, would have made everyone freak out in terror had they realized that, because they would know that the medical testing was bad, wrong, which is also what was implied by the scientist whose research I spoke about with the embryos earlier. There's a problem with our testing, because if the cohorts of test subjects are all together, they can group solve teratogenesis, and individuals can't do that, right? So this could be a whole new branch of medical testing tech, if his theories turn out to be, validatable or repeatable. Okay, but here's the actual problem. When you're looking at data, you throw anomalies away. And that's the key problem right there. Because, first of all, many of the most profound discoveries in science, what hooked the people who discovered them were anomalous results or things that might ordinarily be disregarded, or things that were features of experiments that were disregarded because we had no explanation for them, and they comprise such a tiny percentage of the cohort that we just decided they didn't matter. Well, I got news for you. Anomalies fucking matter. They matter in heuristic pursuit, they matter in epistemological concern, and they matter in ontological concern. And they don't matter a little bit, they matter a lot, right? I mean, this is part of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's argument in The Black Swan. You're going to tell me no one predicted Google? Are you going to tell me it didn't matter? Facebook doesn't matter? Huh? Twitter don't matter? Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, Temu, these things don't matter? Here's a flute player making good use of the natural reverb of the tunnel. Looks like he's also got, what, a piccolo and something that looks like a huge flute, but I'm not sure what that is. But he's playing an actual flute. I mean, by the way, think about jazz music, right? It's mostly sequential anomalies, right? It's like a floating anomaly sequence, right? Often those aren't actually scales. They're little pieces of scales strung together improvisationally, crazy temporalities, and right? And it strikes me that for all the orderliness of nature, it also bears a strong resemblance to jazz. It improvises. And if you're only looking for the reliable, repeatable structures, you might be missing the most important things. You might be missing the intelligence underlying the situation because you previously decided it can't be there. It's impossible. There's no evidence for the context is intelligent. Meanwhile, you come from the context, you are intelligent, right? You are touching the experiments, you are communicating intelligence into the experiments by participating as an intelligent being, and in the ways you forge the context and exclude certain data and include other data and so forth. I mean, imagine the ironic problem of human beings attempting to prove that life can spontaneously develop without intelligent interference or influence, right? Well, you are intelligent and you are running the experiments, so how do you enclose the context so perfectly that no influence from your own intelligence intrudes into the experimental containment, right? I mean, we really don't have any way to do that. We try to do things like, well, enclose it in glass in a Faraday cage. It doesn't matter. You made the glass, you made the Faraday cage, right? The instruments themselves are part of the physics. The instruments become part of the biology. You can't separate the biology and the instruments if there's an enclosure of any kind, right? But the main thing that science does is it chops off the anomalies. And this, by the way, is how we get deadly pharmaceutical drugs, right? You sculpt the data. You sculpt the data to show efficacy. You sculpt the data to show safety. You shave off anomalies. Everyone knows you shave the anomalies off. We've been doing the, So you can certainly hide teratogenic harm that way. Or what is the other word for... okay, come on, hippocampus. You're on. Don't freeze up, bro. Iatrogenic harm. Unintentional harm done by, well, we presume it's unintentional. In the case of falsifications of the safety of techniques and or drugs, that's not unintentional. That's malignant, right? That's malevolent. That's intentional harm. And this is part of why medicine should not be a business. And science should not be a business either. Once either of those become captured by economy, they're going to go south, right, toward bad output and bad outcomes, undesirable outcomes, deception, duplicitousness, and so forth. But here's the really weird thing. If it is common in our scientific behavior, research and development and so forth, to shave off the anomalies and throw them away, then we're going to miss a lot of what's there. And there's a way in which it's efficacious to shave off the anomalies. But as I was saying before, a lot of really profound science starts with someone who asks the question, why are they throwing this data away? Why are they ignoring the anomaly? What does the anomaly have to tell us? John Vervaeke was singing Piaget's brilliance the other day when he said, he went looking for systematicity in the errors in intelligence tests. Everyone else thought, the errors are just noise, right? Nope, they're not noise. Turns out there is systematicity in the errors, which gives us the other side of a coin that we need to see both sides of to be seeing it all. And often this is the case. The truth gets lost in the sorting algorithm that tosses the anomalies and validates the remainder. I have seen things happen in my life, ordinary things, that I'm pretty sure they were probabilistically effectively impossible. Things that there would be zero other instances of, or the expectation that there would be, no one would believe if they had not seen it, that it had occurred. Nature is, in the same way a statistical array of variables is generalizable, but the outliers are crucial to include, because that leads us, that's what takes us in the direction beyond our suppositions of truth, authority, completeness, and so forth. And I would argue that most of the stuff that's truly important to understand, much of the stuff that we need to be able to get at if we are to learn and grow and develop understanding, is getting thrown away by large chunks of science. Now, you know, science today is still a very diverse pool of endeavor, and there are people who are aware of what I'm talking about and trying to, in their own way, to plant their flag on some specific anomaly or the inclusion of anomalous results in research. But I think we're missing a big part of the picture because anomaly gets thrown away. And this is part of why we didn't discover, for example, that cohorts of embryos can solve teratogenic problems better than, large cohorts better than small cohorts, and small cohorts better than single embryos. That implies something, that implies something very profound. Particularly if we eventually find evidence that you can put a diverse cohort of different kinds of embryos together and they can solve problems better, right? That implies some kind of a field effect or a feature of the context that we have not yet been able to elucidate or detect. So my own perspective is many of the most important things that lie undiscovered by science, it doesn't mean no humans know about them. Science isn't the only way to discover things. It's not the only heuristic or didactic way of knowing. There are many branches of spirituality that are incredibly profound in their production of intelligent understanding, awareness, and knowledge. Particularly traditions that rely on meditative practice, and anyone who's ever meditated knows there's a radical difference between doing it by yourself and doing it with a group. They might as well be two different things from, if what you're looking at is actually the distinction. So it's also probably true in our own lives. Anomalies matter hugely, right? Most of our life goes along relatively normatively until boom, something happens. A few weeks ago, there's a garden around the corner from my house. A few weeks ago, the gardeners there discovered a bag with $50,000 in it. That's happened 0 times in the history of that garden. If we were going to throw out the anomalies, we would presume that it's impossible for $50,000 to appear in that garden, but it wasn't. Someone dumped a bag with 50 grand in cash in that garden within 1 or 2 days of them finding it. Anomalies matter. They're hugely important. So if we dismiss them for the sake of generalizability or perceived universality, we're making a huge heuristic error there. It doesn't mean that we need to, only concentrate on the anomalies, but throwing them out for the sake of finishing the study or, presenting what we would like to presume are conclusive results, that's idiotic. And I'm not saying there's no place for that either. There's a branch of practice where that's crucial to do, but then we also have to go back and try to understand, okay, what produced, where did the stuff we weren't expecting come from? That's how heuristics works, that's how science works, that's how learning works. So, I will probably continue to chase this topic at a later date. But for now, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm so grateful for all of you who listen. And I hope you found something fascinating in your own developmental experience today, tomorrow, this week, next week. I look forward to learning together again very soon, and I'm so grateful for this time and your attention. May your way be beautiful. Bye-bye for now. Okay. Unfortunately, I neglected one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Sheldrake went looking on purpose for records from, I think, the late 1800s that where the speed of light was differently measured. In other words, it was being measured in different places and they were getting different values. And the values varied by as much as 20 kilometers per second, which, given the precision with which we can measure things presently, is a huge amount. And he was very curious about this problem. So he went to the sort of British authority over metrics. I can't remember what this is called, but there's basically a central authority over weights, metrics, values, numbers, and so forth. And he talked with the head of the organization. And he told him what was going on. He said, look, I found these, different measurements of the speed of light. And the guy said, oh, too bad, I'm sorry you were confused that way. We fixed that problem a long time ago. You found one of the sort of messes in the historical closet. You can forget about that. And Sheldrake said, how did you fix the problem? And the guy said, oh, well, we defined the meter in terms of the speed of light. And Sheldrake said, but that means that if it changes or if it's different in certain places or under certain conditions, you won't know. The guy said, exactly, we solved the problem so you can forget about it. Now, I don't know what the actual implications of that solution are. But you can see in this a problem with the normalization of data that should diverge, right? You should be getting different readings under different circumstances, and we decide, well, no, we don't want that. That makes it look unscientific, or whatever the problem is, and so you just normalize one of the foundational metrics, and thereafter you don't have the problem of anomalies anymore because you modified your measurement system to account for them. And this leads to a secondary problem, which is the problem of the presumption that effects detected in the laboratory are or can expected to be both A, universal in space, right? They are the same everywhere, which certainly can't be true. There's no chance of that being true. They're not the same in gravity wells, and we live in one. And then also that they're the same over time, which is also clearly not the case for many, many different kinds of variables. Certainly for biological variables, they are not the same over time. Older animals are essentially a different thing from younger animals, even though they have a lot in common. But how would we even know if fundamental constants are changing if we modify our metrics to occlude the possibility of us perceiving the transformation. And, you know, time-space is weird stuff. There's a lot we don't know about it. The Earth and the Sun are traveling through it. What if it has characteristics that have effects on things that we consider to be constants? And we should at least be able to think about that as a possibility rather than just, you know, outright declaring that constants are called constants because they're unchanging. Well, you can declare all the things you want about nature. Nature doesn't care, right? It's going to do what it's actually doing. And, you know, again, we see this sort of tyrannical hubris rather than open-minded inquiry. And that, again, is not the spirit of science. That's the spirit of ideology. It's likely that certain things change over time. And one thing that the experimenters never suspected is that, for example, algorithms run on machines. Consider the difference between a world, in the context of a world, where you have basic computers like we had in the 60s and 70s, and the difference between that world and a world where you have advanced computers like we had in the 80s and 90s, and the difference between that and a world where you have artificial intelligent computers doing trillions of computations per picosecond over, you know, the planetary surface. This changes what it means to be a planet. So lots of things could change. Certainly, if anything even resembling Sheldrake's concerns about morphogenic fields exists, the onset of artificial intelligence systems and hypercomputational systems changes what it means to be a planet and probably changes what computation is. We keep presuming that all of the computers are separate, that they don't have a shared context. It's not true. They do have a shared context. It's called time-space, and it's time-space local to this planet. So that's a shared context. That can change dramatically over time. We may discover that the things that we expected to be objectively structured, repeatable phenomena aren't, right? And we don't, as a species, we don't really believe that that category of phenomena exists. It does. There are categories of phenomena that are inherently anomalous. They don't fit in our categories. They are not repeatable. They are real. We don't know what they are. So, and probably human technological behavior is affecting that situation here on Earth in ways that we are certainly unprepared to predict, especially if we think, well, mechanical function always functions the same in all situations. That's just not true, right? So there's a lot here to explore, and we have a lot more to learn as a species, and I think we're about to get some rude awakenings on a couple of these fronts, where we think, for example, there are, there's scientific ideologies that are eliminatively materialistic. I'm just like, yeah, good luck with that. I think that has a lifespan of about 20 more years at most. Thanks for joining me. Peace out.